Can you see it, Jan?
Yeah. Okay, so let me introduce. So our second hour is on composting. Some like it hot. Composting questions answered. Why should you compost? The benefits are many. Compost enriches soil, reduces the need for fertilizer. It helps the soil to hold moisture. Composting encourages the production of beneficial bacteria and fungi and suppresses plant disease and pests. And composting reduces waste in landfills. This talk hopes you will find the best method for you. There'll be 3 short presentations followed by a question and answer session. The first presentation is on hot compost presented by Patty Driscoll. Patty Driscoll has been an Oregon State University Extension Service Master Gardener since 1993 in Lane County and a compost specialist since 1999. For composting, Patty likes to build hot piles when she has enough greens and browns to fill up her compost bin. She also likes to sheet compost to renew an old bed or start a new bed. And she loves to see all the soil life in the compost. Patty is also a pruning specialist, landscape specialist, and tree fruit specialist with the Master Gardener program in Lane County. So go ahead, Patty.
Okay, so some like it hot. So hot composting is an art and a science of mixing organic materials in a pile and making sure the pile has the right amount of what it needs to do its thing. So you need air, water, nitrogen, carbon, and with turning, heating up, and time, the original materials decompose and transform into a stable humus. Next, we'll cover what to compost. Greens are high in nitrogen, browns are a low in nitrogen source, or also considered carbon source. So for the greens or high nitrogen organic materials as grass clippings, garden trimmings, green pruning debris, coffee grounds, tea bags, kitchen scraps, including vegetables and fruits and aged animal manure. Browns or low nitrogen organic materials are leaves, sawdust, straw, and shredded paper. You can also use woody prunings cut up or chipped. For shredded paper, you should mix it with another brown carbon source. Otherwise, it will become a matted blob of paper mache in your compost. What not to compost? Do not use pet waste, pig or human manure due to disease transmissions. Meat, dairy, invasive weeds, or diseased plant materials, pressure treated wood, or wood ash. Note, wood ash in very small quantities in a compost pile are okay. And we're just talking about like a sprinkling. It's not like emptying out your wood stove and using it all. A little of the alkaline material goes along. So for hot composting, build a pile with a minimum of 1 cubic yard of material. Equal parts of browns, greens, and a bit more green to generate heat if you need to. The heat comes from the microorganisms that are decomposing the organic matter. So usually we go with 2 parts green and 2 parts brown. Mainly you might increase the greens just if you have a lot of veg waste that's large in size, and you can chop it up to make it smaller. And here's a picture of what's, we've got the paper, we've got the straw, we've got veg waste, we've got coffee grounds. You can dump and stir your mix or layer it, and it will mix when you do your first churn. In most backyard composting, the pile is either contained in a wooden or plastic bin with 1/4 inch. If you put 1/4 inch hardwood cloth on the bottom to deter rats or mice, is a good option. Or if you have trouble with those. For plastic bins, fill them to the brim. In a wood large wooden bin or open pile, you want to aim for 1 cubic yard, 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. Most plastic bins aren't quite that size, but they seem, because they have the airflow and bits, they seem to do fine. Build a pile all at once. The minimum of 1 cubic yard, turn weekly, keep it moist. Sorry, hot composting occurs when initial volume of the pile is about 1 cubic yard, 3 feet by 3 feet. A low nitrogen carbon source. Even after a few days, check the temperature. So when you do the hot composting, you want to put in one of these thermometers. Yeah. And put this in the center of your pile. And what you're looking for is that the pile reaches 131 degrees Fahrenheit and does not go over 160. You want the temperature at 131 for 3 days each time you turn the pile. If the pile isn't heating up, you can add a little bit of more grass nitrogen source, or if it's a little smelly when you turn it, you could add more carbon source. When the pile starts to cool, after 5 to 2 days, you pull it apart, or with this earth machine, you can just push on it a little bit, lift it up, and then place it next to it. And then what you want to do is mix it some way you're putting it in there, where you're moving what's to the outside to the inside. Your compost should be wet as a wrung out sponge. If the pile is too wet and smelly, add dry browns and turn more often. If it's too dry, add water when turning. Once it doesn't go over 131 degrees when it's turned, then you can turn it the 4th time and just leave it to cure for 4 to 6 weeks. For an additional 4 to 6 weeks. If using as a mulch around established woody ornaments, you might be able to use it. For cold composting, build a pile slowly with 2 parts brown and 1 part green. Each time you add greens, cover with browns. This will also help keep the fruit flies and flies from flying up in your face the next time you go in to add ingredients. Your pile will probably not go over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But once you fill them in, you should keep it covered and let it cure for several months. Whether you're covering it with the tarp or some kind of top so that the rain doesn't leach out the nutrients. Each time you check it, you should check that it's like a wrung out sponge. So while it's curing during that time, you want to keep going back probably every month, maybe every 2 weeks during this summer, and just checking the moisture. The only thing with cold composting is that it just takes longer to finish. Finished compost will be dark and crumbly and look like soil. Individual materials will not be recognizable. It will smell fresh and earthy. You may see some things, like a little fragment of a leaf, peanut shells, also eggshells take a long time to break down, but you don't have to wait for those to compost all the way. So for hot or cold, choose whichever works best for you and how much time you have.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Next we have Catherine Burke. Want to unmute yourself and turn on your video, Catherine?
There's unmute. Okay. Uh-oh. You have stopped me. It says you're stopping me. Okay, there we go. How's that?
Great.
Here I am.
All right, so let me introduce Catherine. Catherine has been a master gardener since 2004. She's a compost specialist and sustainable landscape specialist. She really took an interest in veggie garden and composting when she was a college student at OSU 50 years ago. Catherine developed a love of all trees, shrubs, and perennials when she and her husband bought property in Cottage Grove about 30 years ago. She has a 4-bin cold compost system. Go right ahead, Catherine.
All right, so I am going to present to you a demonstration on one of the composting techniques called sheet composting or lasagna composting. And that is layer upon layer of organic material, which eventually will break down and create a really nice planting medium. So you have to use your imagination today. And pretend this is an area that you've chosen for a new garden. It's a perfect way to reduce the size of your lawn, and you can create any kind of bed. If you want a vegetable bed, you need at least 6 full hours of sun. Otherwise, you can create one of these beds anywhere because there's so many plants that have so many different light requirements. So we are creating our bed here, this green tarp underneath. Oh, you can't see just because, anyway, that is my lawn area that I've chosen, and I've mowed it very short. And I've chosen an area that doesn't have any pernicious weeds. There's no bindweed or quackgrass or blackberries or things like that, because they all have a tendency to be able to poke right through. So the first thing you do is find some large sheets of cardboard, in which I have right here. To do that, you can get them at furniture stores and bicycle shops and appliance stores, and I'm sure they'd be happy to have you recycle their cardboard for them. So you can choose either cardboard or newspapers. And if you use newspapers, you want to make sure that, there may be 6 sheets thick, and you overlap them so that no grass is showing from underneath. So anyway, I will just quickly do this. You don't want to use any of the shiny inserts. So you want to just use the straight newspaper. And when you're doing this, one of the first steps to do is to water it down. That'll get the decomposition process off to a good start, but it also, if you're using newspapers, keep them from flying away. So this is my first layer, and this is a carbon layer. So now I want to add a high nitrogen source. And so what I'm going to be using next, I think, will be, let me see, here's some things I found out, just picked up out in the garden. Some windfall apples and some things that the slugs have chewed on my hosta leaves and all of that. So this is a nice green layer, which is my first one. And imagine this is covering the entire area. You're just, again, using your imagination. So I now have a nice nitrogen layer. Now I'm going to add a nice carbon layer. And because, well, fall actually is the best time to start a lasagna bed, mainly because it will take fall, winter, and then by spring it'll be ready to plant. In addition, you're going to have an abundance of leaves, which definitely we're starting to get a lot of leaves beginning to turn. We get so many questions about leaves, and yes, you can use oak leaves, and yes, you can use walnut leaves, and any kind. Some of them, the larger leaves, or say like the oak leaves, which are a little thicker. I run them over with my lawnmower, And so that's what these are. So I'm making a nice big pile. And so we've got some nice publications that Jan is putting up the links for. One from Linda Chalker Scott, who's an agricultural extension agent in Washington State, and she's got some great information about walnut trees and walnut leaves that's good for you to read. Okay, so now we have our carbon layer, another layer of nitrogen. And I have chosen coffee grounds, and these are things which you can pick up perhaps from a local coffee shop or a coffee kiosk. You just ask them if they'll save some of their coffee grounds for you. And it's extremely high in nitrogen. It's another name is urban manure. So we're just going to make a nice layer here of these. So next will be a carbon layer. And everyone seems to have shredded paper. So that's what I'm going to do. And as Patty already told you, if you do use this, make sure that you add something like, I'm going to add some more coffee grounds, only because when these get wet, they can really clump up and make paper mache for sure. Coffee grounds, they may come equipped with the filters, which is just perfectly fine. Sometimes you get straws and other exciting things in there, but don't use those. All right, so here's our great layer of nitrogen. All right, so I'm going to find another layer of carbon. My neighbor was using a chainsaw to chop up some wood. So here I've got these nice, wonderful remnants of what he was doing outside. So there's my carbon. Next is nitrogen, and I'm just going to keep on building and building this up, and you can do it as tall as you want. So this is just some of my kitchen veg. And as Patty probably already mentioned there, no meats, fats, bones, things like that, but you can use eggshells and just whatever you have in the kitchen. Okay, next quick layer, another one of carbon. And this happens to be some ornamental grasses that I cut down, which again, this is the perfect time of year to find those. And I also have some foliage from my daffodils and things. I keep a great big garbage can and I fill them up come about July or so when all of those have died back. One last layer, let's see if some green. I did find some little grass clippings, not many. I had to kind of work hard at these this morning. Again, imagine we're covering it entirely. The thing about, well, with grass, I have a mulching blade on my lawnmower, and I'm hoping the rest of you do as well. So I got some more green stuff I happen to find. Okay, imagine this is this tall. So we want to top the whole thing off with a layer of carbon. So I'm going to add some more leaves. This will be, especially if you may happen to have some kitchen waste or veg in there and things, that will keep away fruit flies, or at least keep them at bay anyway, fruit flies, things like that. And then what I do for the very top, I happen to have these burlap bags, and you can get coffee bags from, at least here in the Eugene area, coffee roasters have bags, and they are at a minimal cost, just $1 or $2 a piece. This will tidy it all up, and you can water it down to get it all started. But this, when you use burlap on the top, it will allow the rain to penetrate through to allow everything to decompose. So anyway, ready to go. It'll take all fall, all winter, and then come springtime, you can just plant right down through it. So that's that.
Thanks, Catherine. So next we'll have Shirley, attorney. We'll have her unmute and video and then share her screen.
Oh, we got to go to the very beginning. Ha 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 ha. There you go. Okay, we on?
Have you shared your screen?
Yep.
Okay, it's not showing yet.
I have it. Wait. One more button. You got it?
Not yet. And you need to speak up just a little bit, Shirley. You're kind of hard to hear.
So I have on my screen the starting slide.
Yeah, did you share it on the bottom?
Yep.
And then hit the share on the next one?
Oh, modern technology. Okay, all of our guests. I'm going to come back. Let's try go. I'm going to get out. No. Well, okay, I'm going to escape Jan and come back in.
Okay.
Okay, I have my PowerPoint. I'm hitting the slideshow.
You haven't. There's another share inside.
You know. Okay, I'm missing one share then. Where?
You hit the one on the bottom, the green one on the bottom of the screen. And then there's another one after you go to that.
Oh,
Do you want me to, how about if I do mine for you? And-
jump on it.
Okay.
That's why we have a second, right?
Yeah.
You want me to get out of mine completely then?
Yeah, and then I'll put up mine here. Okay. There we go.
Okay, let's go to the very beginning.
Okay, okay. Just tell me when you do the next one. Let me introduce Shirley real quick. Shirley will be giving the last presentation before the Q&A session on vermicomposting and composting with worms. So get those questions ready and into the Q&A box. Shirley became a master gardener in 2012 after a 37-year teaching career. She serves on 4 master garden committees, enjoys mentoring new trainees, and is the lead member of the Worm Wrangler vermicompost team. So go ahead, Shirley.
Thank you. 37 years in the teacher, and this is all new. Well, fairly new. So I'm going to start out by composting the worm way, and depending on where you do your research on reading it, you're going to hear the word verma. Microsoft doesn't recognize that. That's a created word. It has an I in it. So you have vermicomposting, you have vermicasting, and also people just say I'm composting with worms. They are all talking about the same thing. So you can advance. Okay. So a couple of resources that are really easy. One is the Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Applehoff. Has been around for years. It's a great family book, a great kids book. Teachers use it a lot in classrooms, and it's basically just a really nice tutorial. The other one I'm sharing is what you can find in the OSU Extension Catalog, and that's EM9034, and that is a very nice tutorial that starts at the very beginning and actually shows you how to build a bin and troubleshoot. So basically what we're talking about is a worm that's in the top 6 inches of our surface of our gardens, on our lawns, and anywhere there's organic matter. And they are red wigglers. The scientific name is an Encivita vittata. We call them red wigglers. My grandfather called them manure worms because they were always out in the field. Basically, these worms live in the top part, the top 6 inches of our yards, more so in vegetation, less in gardenings because there's not much. We don't have leftover vegetation to rot and to decay. So basically, they are in a high organic matter. So when we're working with them, we need to remember where their natural habitat is. So in the upper left-hand corner is basically a 2-stack Rubbermaid bin. You can have a stacked bucket. Some people have moved to worm towers because you harvest it gradually and you rotate those trays. The bottom left is one of the ones that the 4x8 box. You can actually go to the extension when we open back up after COVID. There's a demonstration site there, and that is a 4x8 worm bin. The flow through, which is the next one, is also on site when we open back up. And basically, you do not take anything out. You basically rake it from the bottom. And the newer one is a right, and that is a tiered, and they actually have a drawer underneath that they're collecting it, and it's also more rat resistant. So basically, looking at the construction of a bin, we're creating it for habitat to mimic where these worms live. So they need ventilation. So we have vents. We have a stacking bin. The bottom bin catches what we call leachate, or the water runoff, so things do not get so soggy. And for the human, we have a little tap so that we are able to drain that off without picking it apart every time. So basically, as Catherine said and Patty said in compost, we're dealing with carbon and nitrogen too. We have some of the very same things for carbon is your bedding is your leaves. We tear them and we shred them so that they don't pack. Whole leaves will pack on top of each other. Shredded paper, not glossy. I actually use newsprint and shred it, but I do not use the comics or anything that has a lot of color. Core is byproduct of the coconut industry, and basically it's your water retention. They put in a lot of potting soils, a wetting agent, water. And so we do put that in. I put it in the summer times to maintain moisture. Your nitrogen is your veggie waste, just like your other compost systems. And the reason that we have the nitrogen in there is because as it decays, the worms are feeding off of the fungi and the bacteria that are growing on those vegetables. Whatever we put in it, the ratio to make sure it's balanced is necessary, so it doesn't go south on you. It doesn't start stinking. So what's for dinner is all the good stuff. Anything in your refrigerator that's vegetable based. Anything eggshells, that adds calcium. It also adds grit, and it helps with pH. So you grind those up, bake them, grind them up. You can have bread and pizza, they say. I always remind people whatever you put in there could be a rodent attractant. And so be mindful about what you're putting in there. So bread, if it's already molded, I'll throw it in there, but not normally. What I don't put in is citrus. I don't put in oils and vegetables that have my oil and vinegar on it. There's no meat, no dairies, no cheese, no grass clippings. Those are not part of the worm's diet. They may do the grass clippings after it breaks down, but grass clippings are so high nitrogen that you're going to get an off balance on your ratio. So basically, we have to click through this one because this one wanted to do, so basically we have different, go ahead and click them all. Basically what you have is different insects that are in our soil. This is soil life. This is what we want to put back in our soil life. So when I'm putting my compost, when I'm putting my vermicompost back in, I probably am adding some of these. They are all basically beneficial, with the exception of one. If you click one more, you're going to see the soldier fly and the soldier fly larvae. The larvae is in there. It will make they make a bin wet. So if you see the larvae, they start out white and then they turn brown. You want to take those out. The soldier fly is very docile. It'll land on your shoulder and it just wants to lay its eggs. That's the only one that I will take out when I find them. The rest of them, part of our soil life. What I don't want are these two. They are, yeah, go ahead. These are the top of the food chain, and they will eat worms. They will devour eggs, and they do not need to be in there. Some people take them out. I take them out and throw them in my flower bed. I have to go live somewhere else. The slugs and snails, I don't, because they chew on my stuff. So that would be your choice where you put them, but they don't belong in the bin. They don't need to be the food chain. Okay, so harvest time. People ask a lot about harvest time. There's lots of different ways. I've showed you two ways. One's a backbreaker. You put the piles, you empty your bin out, you put them in volcanoes. You expose them to light. Worms don't like light. They're going to run, and they're going to literally go to the center of that cone, and you just gradually massage those piles and take them off. What I have gone to is I've taken that and I just put it on a table. I put a bucket in between my legs. I sit on a bucket and I basically sort. And as I come with worms, I'm going to basically remove those worms. I'm going to put a new bin, fill it all the way up, ready to go. And I'm going to add those worms as I find them. I'm also going to take the leftover leaves and I'm going to take the leftover little bit of vermicompost, and that's going to be my inoculants. It's going to be my fungi, my bacteria that have already established in the bin, and that will jumpstart my new bin a lot quicker. So the big three, it actually is more than three, but you're basically three. If you can do aeration, which is good air, fluff up the bin once in a while, get some air pockets underneath, don't let the leaves collapse on it. Basically a good moisture balance. Your food, you want that carbon nitrogen balance, and you also want temperature, and your temperature of a good bin is 55 to 75. If it gets a little hot, you can run water through it and cool it down. You want to make sure that your temperature, you're going to be bringing it in the wintertime in a garage, a basement. You leave it outside. That bin's not big enough, doesn't have enough mass to keep from freezing. So you want to monitor, and if you hit all three of those, you're going to have a very successful bin. So with that, I guess we would go back to Jan.
Yeah, so we'll have Catherine and Patty both unmute and show your video, and then we'll start some questions. If anybody have questions, please put them in the Q&A.
Well, there were a couple of questions for peat mulching already that I answered,
Okay.
but one was, can you do it on a slope? And I think that will work just fine. Perhaps if you use newspapers rather than cardboard, which would keep it from sliding down your hill, depending on the slope, but just to, have a better base. And then the other question was, if you don't have access to burlap, what can you do on the top? And just a layer of leaves on the top is great, as the top layer.
Okay, I have some other questions. This one is for Shirley. What do you know? How do you know it's time to harvest worms?
So basically what you're doing is when you fill your bin up, establish a brand new bin, you take it up to the vents. And then basically as you keep adding stuff to keep it up full, the Burma is going to be heavier, and it's going to start compressing down the bottom. It's going to go to the bottom of that bin. And basically when you feed and you notice that the worms are having less, you can dig down. If you can dig down 3 or 4 inches and you hit pure Burma, and it looks like chocolate cake, and it's finished, that tells you that the worms have less room, and you need to think about starting to harvest it to give them more of an area to live in. And it probably takes anywhere between 5 and 6 months, depending on how many worms you have, what the ratio is, the environment. I run a bin twice a year. I clean my bin out twice a year.
Okay. So also a couple more questions is, what is the ratio for worm bin and temperature range? Not sure.
55 to 75 is for temperature. I've seen it go a little bit lower in some of our offsite. We maintain 3 4x8 bins, and basically I've seen it go down to 42. We've put burlap on it to keep it warm. I have seen bins go up into the upper 80s, and as soon as I notice that, we rinse it back down. You really try to keep it somewhere between 55 and 70 times. That's what they say is their optimal temperature for production, breeding, all that.
So how do you know if you have too many worms and need to start a new worm bin?
That is usually the #1 thing. Basically, you could get 1,000 to 3,000 worms in a worm bin. I mean, they multiply. They multiply freely. What you want to do is we give the worms to other master gardeners. We used to sell them. Basically, a lot of people say, well, if you start with a bin, and I have more worms, I'm going to start another bin. A lot of people build a bigger bin, or they build a wood bin, or they build a box bin. And so sometimes the small beginning bin is kind of a starting point for a lot of people, depending on how much vermicompost they're wanting. So it's hard because you can't count them. But sometimes eventually you'll say, wow, I have too many worms, and reduce it by half. And listen, you count. I tried counting once, it didn't work. So.
Okay.
Do you have any other? It's kind of a visual thing. There really isn't a calculation for how many worms are in there. Probably 1,000 worms would be plenty for a bin that size, for a 14-gallon bin.
Okay, next one's for Patty. Shirley says to remove soldier fly larvae from worm compost. Should I remove it from my earth machine composter too?
So the black soldier fly larvae is a decomposer. It's great. The only problem with the black soldier fly larvae, if you have a large infestation, they give off a lot of moisture. So you may find when you turn it that it's a little more moist than you want. So you may have to add another carbon source. But there's a lot of decomposers out there. And you want all the decomposers doing all the action. And even they'll come in when it cools down. I mean, they're not going to be there at the really high temperatures also. And that's the same with the worms. The worms will go down into the ground and then they'll come back up in.
Okay, next questions for Shirley. Can the worm castings be mixed with water and used as fertilizer?
So the nice thing about vermicomposting is you're getting decayed material from all of the bedding that was in there. Plus, you're getting the worms. The enzyme goes through it. The worm mixes it, and we call it worm poop, which is it is. It's the castings. That is a nice nitrogen source, and it's mixed in with that. They have done vermicompost, like people want to make some kind of a compost tea or something like that. You're going to carry that in with the water. But basically, you've got the organic matter and their castings, and a combination of that. You can put it right in the soil, and it will not burn, and it will actually blend in very quickly in planting.
Next question for Catherine. Can you top the lasagna with soil?
I have topped my lasagna bed with some, from Lane Forest, their planting mix, just to kind of tidy it all up and hide what I made. And actually I planted immediately. But what I had to do was dig down through my pile of stuff and cut the ring of cardboard out. And then, because I planted a perennial bed, I even had a small tree that I planted. So I created an instant garden with a lasagna bed, the top dressing of the soil, and plants. So yes, you can do that.
Okay. Next question's for Patty. Can you compost all plant matter? What about tomato vines, for example?
Yes, you can. All your tomato vines and other plant material that you're taking out of your vegetable garden, you can run them through your compost. The problem is you just want to be sure that the plant is not diseased. So if you had early blight or late blight on your tomatoes, do not put it in your compost. You'll just be having that in the compost and spreading it next year.
This could be for anybody. If you have an active compost pile, is it desirable to do a worm composting in addition, and why?
I would say, if you have more vegetable waste from your house than what your hot compost or your cold compost can handle, or that you want to switch over to worm composting and try it, that's, I mean, everybody likes what they like, Shirley, what do you think?
If you would repeat the last part of that, it didn't come through over here.
Is it desirable to do worm composting in addition to an active compost pile, and why?
I do both. I do hot, I do cold, and I have 2 worm beds. And basically, it's what I want to use with the product. For the hot and cold compost, I'm using it out in my garden. I'm using it around my roses and around my fruit trees, and I use it to blend in. For the worm bin, it's a little bit finer for me, and I use it in my potting soil. I use it in my seeding soil, and I use it in the garden when I'm planting specifics. I don't get as much worm. I only get 5 gallons every harvest, which seems like a lot, but it goes pretty fast if I use it and mix it in the garden all the way. So I'm using the hot and cold compost to mix in on a yearly basis to refresh the soil, and then I'm really sparingly using my vermicompost for certain projects.
Patty, why is the volume of a cubic yard so important in hot composting?
The cubic backyard, the 3 by 3 by 3 is one of the reasons you don't want to go any higher than 3 feet. If you go higher than that, you're compressing the material. It's just the kind of through research has come out to that, like it's a wonderful size. Some people make it a windrow and they maybe make it 6 feet long. You know, people that do a 3 by 3, a lot of people build 2-bin or 3-bin wooden compost, and that's kind of also a nice size to be able to handle. The earth machines and the other plastic bins that you get aren't quite the 3 by 3, and they seem to work. And you can make a hot compost work that's 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, but mainly it's keeping the ratio, checking the temperature, and turning it. You know, whether it's weekly turning it or every 10 days. You're watching that temperature once it goes up, and then once it starts to come down, you turn it again.
Okay, this is, I think, for anybody. Do you use bokashi or other compost activator in the lasagna, hot, or worm composting forms?
What I've heard is I'll go. The bokashi, I've heard of people doing bokashi and then running it through hot compost. I've heard that if they take the bokashi and then run it in the worms, it doesn't do as well. But there's some people that want to do it, that bokashi, hot, and then run it through worms also, just so that they have that fine product. But to me, I just want to make compost. Have you ever used bokashi and worms, or Catherine?
I never have. I don't do worms, for one thing. And I have not done bokashi either. Just a cold compost kid here.
What about Shirley?
I do not do bokashi. And when I put stuff in the worm bin, it's measured, it's calculated. I know how much is in there. It's breaking down gradually. And again, the worm bin is mimicking nature. Gradual decomposition, and you put the bokashi in there, which is already starting to ferment. I personally wouldn't do it, and I don't know of anybody that has.
Okay. What is the nitrogen carbon ratio for worm bins?
You want it to, I don't know if they don't say 50-50. I would say it's probably 75-25, because you basically are building their environment, which is probably 75-80% of the bin. And then you have your fruit and your vegetables that you're putting in there. They're breaking down and they're gone. So that percentage is constantly changing. So if they're out of food, then you put more food in. If you run out of leaves, you put more leaves and shredded paper in. So I don't know if there's a way to measure that, but I would say 80-20. If you look at an average bin of how much food in there and how much leaves and shredded paper and organic matter.
For Shirley, can you put leaves from yard plants such as a hosta in a worm bin?
Again, if you want to go back, like Patty was saying, is you really want to be careful about diseases and things that that may or may not be on those plants. I personally do not. I have not seen anything where they say vegetative leaves put in there, even though that would be a nitrogen source. There's just, or if it's green and if it's dry and it's chipped up and it doesn't, that's a carbon source. And if it was on the ground, it would be a carbon source. So I don't see any problem with that. But I wouldn't necessarily use it as a nitrogen. I would let it dry out and use it as a carbon and ship it up like you would regular leaves.
Okay. So I have one more question, and then we probably have time for one or two more if somebody else would like to put one in the Q&A. But this one's for Shirley. I have a worm bin that had beautiful vermicompost, but with tons of eggshells. So apparently I put too many in. What would you say is how often and how much to put in?
Eggshells. Eggshells. Well, you can do eggshells. You can also do oyster shell calcium. And basically, again, you're trying to enrich that you want to test the pH. And so we use a very simple pH meter. Even though the pH meter is not totally accurate, it's going to give you at least a constant number. And basically, eggshells, if it's baked and then really powderized or ground up, you're actually adding some grit for the worm, which they have a gizzard and they need a little grit anyway. So again, you go back to your basic 3, and that is a ratio. Sometimes that's a visual ratio of how much you have in it. It doesn't take a lot of calcium. Doesn't take very much. And again, get a pH meter, and if you're nailing right at 7.0, then I wouldn't add anything else.
So you said bake them?
Eggshells, you can actually, I bake them with my biscotti. I put them off to the side. I bake them on until they're crisp, not burnt, but crisp.
Yeah.
Put them in a plastic bag. I save them, and then I roll them with a roller pin, and I have eggshells for my worm bin, and I also have eggshells for my garden.
Okay.
Good way to get rid of eggshells.
Okay, let's see. I got a few more here. Okay. When I use my vermicompost, I usually end up with tomato or squash seeds growing up too. Do you do something special to keep seeds from germinating from worm composting?
Whatever you put in, you're going to get back out. If you put tomatoes in hot compost, you're going to get them back out. If you put tomatoes in tomatoes and squash, you're going to have a field because they're going to germinate. It's a great growing medium. So if you don't want the seeds in there, then don't put the seeds in them to start with. Take the seeds out and then just put in clean veggie without anything to germinate.
Okay. What do you like to use? How do you like to use the finished earth machine compost? Is there a good use for it this time of year? When planting seedlings, is it best to add it to the top or with the roots?
So at this time of year is a great time for like digging and dividing your perennials or planting new shrubs. So I'll use the compost, you know, as a mulch on top of when I replant something. If I'm doing seedlings, I wait for the seedlings to sprout and then I'll put the compost on there. And yes, you might have some squash come up or tomato seeds come up, but they're easy to weed out. You know, you just have to watch. I wouldn't use it as the top cover and then have seeds below it. And then when things sprout, you don't really know if it's something from your compost or what you plant.
I use my compost as a soil amendment because I know mine has seeds in it because I do my cold compost. So if I am planting something, I incorporate some of my finished compost in it and it's underground. So I know that it's not really going to be sprouting up like Shirley's tomato plants or things like that. So
I have two more here. We'll do these two and then that'll be it for today. I hear a rumor that coffee grounds are bad for composting, but both Patty and Catherine mentioned using them. Have either heard this rumor myth and know where it came from and why some people would think this?
I don't know, Patty, have you heard that?
There's a lot of myths, you know. I mean, people think that it makes your compost more acidic, where all the acid has been taken out when you make the coffee. I would not use it as a big layer in your compost. I like to mix it in because it can compact down, you know, become this mass itself, kind of like the paper mache from shredded paper. One time I thought it was, wonderful when we started using the compost or coffee grounds in the compost, and I was like, the slugs and snails didn't like it. So I mulched a bed that had lettuces in it with about 2-inch thick of coffee grounds. And 2 weeks later, I found out it was this hard, compacted, dry material, and no moisture was going in it. So I had to pull it all off and then compost it. So part of it is, if it's blended in with the compost, it's great. But I don't know if you want to point us to the article where you heard about the myth, or if you just heard about it from somebody, we can look into it. Shirley.
Can I interject? There was some research that Master Gardeners were reading, and we've been watching the idea of coffee grounds in the worm bin. And what we found out is the same thing Patty said, is they do compact. And we're getting some compaction. We were getting a lot of excess moisture. And so the last bin that we built, we didn't put coffee grounds in it. We're kind of running that one down because they are heavy. They sink to the bottom, and they are. And so we're kind of playing with the idea of not no coffee grounds in worm bins or vermicomposting. And there was a couple of articles that were written, but they've been a while, and we haven't found any others. So that might have been where some of that rumor may have come from. People talking about worm bins, compost, et cetera, et cetera.
So quick answer to this one, if possible. If you use coffee grounds as a feedstock in composting, is there an amount that is too much? It's kind of along the same line.
So for my hot or cold composting, if I'm putting in coffee grounds and I want to mix in some other green material with that, so I would go with 1.5 parts another green material to 1/2 part of coffee grounds, just so that it's not one mass. I have used coffee grounds. We did an experiment back in the early 2002-3, where we were trying to find out for just leaves, if you could speed up the composting of leaves to make leaf mold. And we did a test of having just leaves, with coffee grounds, and leaves with alfalfa pellets. And all of them made fine leaf mold, but it was only a sprinkling of coffee grounds. It wasn't a layer of coffee in with the leaves.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, anybody else? Okay, that's great. Great, thank you guys. We will start getting ready for next one with Stephen.
Okay. We have video. Do we have sound?
Yeah. Yes. So we'll make sure you can get yours up and then I'll introduce you, okay?
Okay. There.